everybody. All right, so I like to call things to order by I'll say good afternoon and then you say good afternoon to the back just to make sure we're all on the same page. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, that was wonderful. I felt like I was, in church and y'all are a choir, so that was fantastic. So my name is Dr. Jelena Oxley. Welcome to today's event that is being sponsored by the Jackson Family Center for Ethics and Values. This is an event that focuses on the ethics of development in our area. And so let me just briefly give you an idea of how things are going to go today. We've got 1 hour to be together today, so I request that you hopefully stay the whole entire time unless you have an absolute emergency or something that comes up. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start off, we have 5 absolutely fantastic panelists. And I want to be sure to give them time to be able to talk about what they want to talk about and an opportunity for you guys to ask them questions. So at this point, what we're going to plan on is I've got some prepared questions that I'm going to ask the panel. And that's going to last about 40, maybe 45 minutes or something like that. And then we're going to open things up to the audience to ask questions. I usually make a little announcement that we usually let the students ask questions first. So just hold on to your questions. If you have something that comes up, just write it down, and then we'll address that if you don't have a question that comes up that is answered during the regular course of the event. Okay, so let me just briefly tell you about our panel. So we have an illustrious panel. I'll just have them wave so you know which one each person is. So we have Dr. Pam Martin. She's a professor in politics. She directs the Rice Center at Coastal, which is a branch of the UN Center on Education for Sustainable Development. She worked really hard to get this established in conjunction with the UN, so we're really excited to have Pam on the panel today. We also have Dr. Jamie McCauley. She's in the sociology department, and she directs the Social Justice Research Initiative, which also hosts an event on social issues in our area, so she's very well qualified to discuss this. We have Dr. Rob Salvino, who's a professor of economics and director of the Grant Center for Real Estate and Economics. We had a lovely time talking economics the other day, and so we're going to have a lot of our questions about economics answered by him. We have Dr. Alan Todd, who is my colleague in the Religious Studies Department, and he directs the Conway Architectural Salvage and Heritage Project, which seeks to find wood that's been built in homes that was used 100 years ago or so that's still good, and to repurpose it and be used in still building homes today. Finally, we have Adam Enright, who is the city administrator for the city of Conway. He's technically a lawyer. Do you get a title for that?
I'm a reformed lawyer. I'm no longer licensed.
No longer licensed. Okay, so never mind. Skip that whole lawyer thing. All right. And so he's basically responsible for administering the paperwork. He's not a politician, but he is responsible for administering all the processes and procedures and everything that comes through the city of Conway for development. So I thought it would be useful to have somebody who could actually land the helicopter for us. We're professors, we like to do our research, but we also need to know how things happen in real time in the real world. And then I'll just be moderating our discussion. So I'd like to just start you off by sort of expediting the process of how the discussion's gonna go. I met with each of these wonderful people over the past couple of weeks for about an hour with each person. I learned so much from them. And what I realized from talking to these panelists is that we're not really in an either-or situation. We're in a situation where we're all trying to figure out how to move forward and what to do going forward. So what I wanted to do is just highlight some of the things that I heard from them that they were all in kind of shared agreement on, and then we could kind of move the discussion forward in terms of asking questions. So just really briefly, our starting point is not that we're going to be going pro-development versus no development. There's nobody on the panel up here who's like, no, we're going to, development stinks and we should all stop. There's also nobody that's going to be like, development at all costs, right? So what we're trying to figure out is how to develop better and more sustainably, given that development's going to happen one way or the other. So how can we do that so that it's in everybody's interest and not just a handful of the population's interest? I want to just flag briefly some challenges that I heard that were similar to everyone that was on the panel. We have some governance infrastructure challenges. So one of the things in our areas that we have incorporated towns like City of Conway and City of Myrtle Beach. Where we are right now is called unincorporated. That means that, and 98% of Horry County is unincorporated. So that means it's governed by the Horry County Council. So we have lots of governance structure issues in terms of people not being able to have input on their local communities. Another problem that I heard consistently was problems of wages, rent, and affordability of housing. So that's going to be a topic that we address. A lack of regional guidelines and guardrails. So we're not the only county that's developing. There's Georgetown County. There's all the way down to Charleston. We've got rivers that are coming from upstate. How are we going to manage this? I'm a cancer survivor, but I was really upset when I heard about all this river pollution that's in the Black River, the PD River, and the Waccamaw. There's forever chemicals getting dumped in. And then this one, 4-dioxane, is a cancer-causing chemical that's 70,000 times higher than what's recommended. That threatens our clean drinking water here in the Lake Country. The final things are the lack of big picture stormwater planning, a lack of financial incentives for watersheds and undeveloped lands, and a lack of incentives for ecotourism. So, and then the final thing, and I think you might find this interesting, is that 55% of college graduates leave South Carolina after graduation. So we have a little bit of what you can call a brain drain. We tend to lose our young people. And so what is not keeping them here? And so we could sort of think about, the lack of jobs is the number one reason, but we could try to think about how to change these things. Okay, so with all these things on the table, I'm going to ask all the panelists a very specific question I want to hear from all of them. So I'd like for you to briefly describe what you take to be the most significant challenge with respect to growth in the Horry County or Grand Strand area, and that's just based on your perspective. Rob, you're sitting closest to me, so I'll just go ahead and call on you.
All right, thank you. Thanks for putting this on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you could speak into the microphone, because we're gonna record this for posterity.
Everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So thank you again. Thanks for putting this on. This is a great topic, the entire thing, and glad to be here with everyone. So when I think about, what is the most important thing? I think, I'm a 50-year-old guy. I'm married. I have 3 kids. 2 of them have gone to college, educated here, came from somewhere else, came from Atlanta before here, Columbus, Ohio before that, West Virginia before that. I was in Arizona for a little while. I've looked at charter schools, looked at everything, but my children were public schools, Georgetown County, not Horry County, so I'm also in Georgetown, not Horry. My kids are very active in sports, youth sports. I'm very active in all kinds of outdoor things. And I like to focus on the youth. If you look at population growth, we've doubled in size in Horry County since the year 2000 to 400,000 people. That's from 200,000 people. We have 2 peaks in population. We have the retiree population has always been a major peak, but we also have a young cohort of population, which is the teens to probably the 20s, is our minor peak, but it's significant. And it goes all the way back to the 1990s it's kind of been like that. That's unique to Horry County. Charleston is nothing like that, and Greenville is absolutely nothing like that. Greenville is very uniform across the entire age spectrum, right? So we should think, why is that? But in terms of my interest and why I became a professor of economics is growing up in West Virginia and coming to the Carolinas, North Carolina, I always saw no education equals no jobs, no opportunity, right? And so I went into education. But I really think the most important part of education is at the younger level, the pre-K to say 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And what I think should happen here more is to encourage public-private partnerships, investments for after-school programs, for recreational opportunities, make sure that our rec facilities are adequately staffed, that the operating hours are 7 days a week, times where youth and other parts of the community are able to get in there and participate. In a lot of other areas, the the participation level and the opportunities for the public infrastructure is higher, right? So I think we should benchmark it. I think we should pay attention to what Greenville's doing in terms of outdoor access. I was part of a committee to develop bike paths in Merle's Inlet. They still have not finished that. That's Georgetown County, right? And our research said, look, you have to finish the bike paths, you have to maintain them over time. You're going to need continued funding, whether it's from nonprofits, whatever it is, to make these work, right? And look at Charleston, Somerville, all these other areas, how are they doing things? So from my perspective, that's important. Housing, and then I'll finish, I'll probably run over already. We need to encourage new development outside, away from the beach, right? Away from the beach. A lot of people, I've got this Loris Cup, it just happens, I've had this forever. Somebody who used to work for me from Loris. Loris is an example of where you can go and build, and it's relatively affordable compared to closer in to the beach, right? And that's just a fact. So that's important to think about how we can build out there sustainably. And when we build big developments, multi-purpose developments, multimodal transportation infrastructure, a problem we have in this state is so much of the roadway is maintained by the state. Over 60% last time I checked. The US average is 19%. So when you try to do something locally, you have to get state permission. That can be difficult. And I think there needs to be more cooperation between the local governments and the state governments to make sure that the public infrastructure that we build for our communities is adequate and encourages people to use it in the younger ages, and that's our future. I think that's it.
Thank you so much. We'll just move on right down the line.
Thank you, Jelena, for organizing, and those were great comments. Tough act to follow. So for me, thinking about the most significant challenge, I was reflecting on this, and for me, I really felt like it was a lack of visionary thinking. And it made me think of this truism that I've heard, and many of you all have probably heard: if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So because Horry County's development is still relatively new, and we are deeply aware of the storm and flood risk in the county, we actually have an opportunity to be on the forefront of designing communities that are sustainable and resilient. But we have yet to continue to build commitment to really designing for the future and really investing in long-term thinking. We get what we have always got: rapidly built subdivisions, more impervious surfaces, more displaced runoff, increased flood risk for some, but then higher insurance rates for us all, pretty much. So for the last several years, my research has brought me into deep and frequent contact with scientific experts, government officials, environmental advocates, and individuals who've experienced repetitive flooding in their homes and communities. I have observed and participated in countless hours of meetings, testimonies, hearings, and events. I've performed in-depth qualitative research interviews with environmental scientists, ecologists, hydrologists, geographers, marine scientists, and various other sustainability experts about the causes and consequences of flooding in Horry County. So that's really has been my area of focus for the last several years, and kind of my lens into development in the county. That's not the only way to see it, but that's kind of where my focus has been. And there are many factors that contribute to flooding and flood risk in Horry County, but development is one. And Rob is right, like it's not just development here, or Jelena, I think you both mentioned, it's development in this county, it's development up in other parts of the watershed in North Carolina. There are a lot of moving parts here, so I don't want to overstate one solution more than another, but when I talk about that idea of visionary thinking, again, like we have an opportunity as we grow, as we continue to think about how can we do this development, to really engage in the long term and really look at models out there for doing so in a way that is focused on resilience. One local expert I talked to, who is someone who was born and raised in Horry County, who loves Horry County and all that it has to offer, and he's seen the growth and development. He said, in some ways, Horry County is so far behind, we have a chance to be ahead of the curve. And again, like this is someone who loves Horry County, and it is his heart and his passion. He's worked diligently to improve so many aspects of the county. So that's not a dig or a diss. I don't think anyone wants to say that. But that is him like really saying like, I love this place and we can do better. But that, you know, we're coming from behind and we have a chance that if we really sat down and looked at the models that were out there and really engaged in the expertise that is around us and what we can do to cultivate resilience, we could do that. So he said we have a chance to be ahead of the curve and we still have that chance despite all the development that has taken place. So rather than building, you know, disposable homes based on short-term thinking, we could be building and designing communities that are good for people and the environment. In my experience, it is sometimes hard to meet people in the county who really support these things, but on the surface, but once you get talking to people beyond buzzwords and really get into ideas, you'll find a lot more agreement. So I have a lot of hope that we can, you know, kind of come together and learn from each other and find that vision.
Thank you.
Well, hopefully, I think you can hear me if I go like this, right? Okay, perfect. So I want to thank Jelena for inviting us, and it's really fantastic to see a crowd of people out there. So I'd like to reframe your question, because why the heck not?
Sure.
And I'm gonna continue down the path. Maybe I'd like to say that the biggest problem that I see is the biggest opportunity. I'm going to carry what Jamie said forward. It's being hopeful. So the definition of sustainable development is protecting what we have today for future generations. And I'm looking out at future generations. We started the United Nations Center, Regional Center of Expertise on Education for Sustainable Development, which is a terrible title, but it's the only one of its kind on the Southeast coast. And there's only 30 some odd in all of the Americas, and we happen to have one at Coastal Carolina University. And we've actually been global leaders on a number of initiatives, and our Office of Resilience in the state is really fantastic nationwide. I think we have a lot of things that we can be proud of. The problem is we're also faced with some challenges that are beyond our control, and I would argue that they're not existential. And so climate change is, we are on ground zero here, and we thought that we could escape to the mountains, and now we know that we can't do that either. And so I think that we are finding that being hopeful is a necessity, long-term planning is a necessity, and we have a great platform through the Office of Resilience. I would say that there are 5 elements that we need to look at, because being resilient, and resilience is a factor of being sustainable. And there are 3 things: people, planet, and prosperity. And they are built on the foundations of peace and partnerships. I think one of the best things we can do at a university campus is to teach our students to be peaceful with one another, to respect and love one another. And the best thing we can do is to teach them to be collaborative. In fact, when I had this morning, I'm teaching a professional certification class, and one of the biggest elements that executives in sustainability are facing is they don't have the skill set to be able to collaborate across units inside of multinational corporations. We face the same problem in our own government structures because our governments were built at a time before we faced the threats. And so all of us on university campuses, we're all siloed, right? It's lovely to be out of my box for a little while. But we're all very siloed, and we have to build skills and knowledge that allow us to have a more holistic approach in a collaborative manner. And those I don't call those soft skills anymore. I call them real skills. And we need to develop them among young people. The last thing, I will just focus on economics, because a lot of people say if you're sustainable, then you can't have jobs. That's just wrong. We need to attract with a holistic approach. So it's a mindset approach, an economy that we want, an economy built on where we are, an economy built on a future that we want. And that means attracting industries that we want. It also means creating a resilient workforce, one that's educated, but one that also lives in housing that doesn't flood and has the opportunity to be able to withstand challenges that we know are coming. And so businesses, and this isn't just sort of a hope, this is an economic imperative because we faced over $93 billion of losses in 2023 in the United States. And companies don't want to come to a place that is risk, and they measure risk. That's important for their investments, and increasingly so. So we want to make sure that we create a base of a safe environment, a safe society and workforce that can be resilient, that attracts the type of economy that will keep our brilliant students here. And that requires a lot of collaboration among all of us and sort of a mindset change to be more holistic. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, again, Joanna, for setting this up, panelists. So my name's Alan Todd, and I'm a professor here in religious studies, but I'm I'm also a trained archaeologist and a historian. That's really what I am. And over the past 3 years, I've found myself oddly using all my skill sets to establish a local nonprofit called Conway Architectural Salvage and Heritage Project. And it is our goal in a kind of ideal utopic situation that we hit on virtually all the issues that have been brought up so far. In a very interesting way, development to some extent offers us an opportunity to flip the script and begin to create a circular economic engine based on building material reuse, right? So we have so far, I'd say actually just the past year, salvaged over 500 tons of used building materials, kept that out of the landfill, which by the way is full, right? This is why the Solid Waste Authority gave us $10,000 recently as a grant to help us run our operations and keep materials out of the landfill. Another element to what we had a chance to do, though, and this is where my archaeological background comes in and training as a historian, is that the way we operate is when structures have to come down, right? Not structures that simply necessarily get out of the way. We will work towards preserving those that can be saved. But when they have to come down, we come in and take them apart by hand, salvaging all the materials, right? Even the nails, actually, which in some cases can be reused, but certainly can be recycled, melted down, and become art. In the process, though, we record all this live, so that soon we will have our first full home deconstruction representing virtual reality format. And next to that structure will be a description of the architectural and lived histories, as well as a thick description of the materials that were put into the structure. That brings us finally to the materials. And the biggest issue, to bring back to your question, Loretta, is what we're facing, is that when development comes to structure, and this is a national, worldwide problem, which is to say that the demolition and construction industry contributes approximately 40% to greenhouse gas emissions. If you think about virgin materials that are needed to be produced to build structures, concrete alone is approximately 9% greenhouse gas emissions to produce concrete. The cutting down of trees and forests, of course, is not only problematic in itself, in the sense that you lose now this carbon capturing machine, but you now have to transport it and mill it in addition to all this. It is our belief, Conway Architectural Salvage, especially in the process of now reviving a historic lumberyard, as well as an adjacent large property, that we have all the materials we need in the current structures that exist. It is possible. Again, it's a theoretical kind of construct, but so far we've cut hundreds of tons out of the landfill. Putting these materials back into reuse, whether it's for structural purposes or whether it's to shore up the homes that are falling apart, that can be saved, right? We also provide materials on a sliding scale, so those that need these materials can get them. Finally, we want to be an example of conscious kind of sustainable development. So the properties that we are revitalizing at this point, one of them we call the ice house, because it's an old historic ice house. We are working with two cohorts of engineering students here at Coastal, and they are working on designing a new roof because it needs one, because currently the iron beams are coming up, concrete slabs are coming in, so we have to take care of those, recycle them, of course. But then they're working on designing a green roof. We're trying to push them in a direction to be inventive and creative, and the goal would be, ideally, that the roof is collecting water. It's growing and collecting water. This structure can hold it, right? It's incredible. This thing is built like a tank. And so any water though that is not captured would then be filtered off the side of the building and then enter a greenhouse that we're also supervising, which will have aquaponic system. The fish will poop in the water, and then the water eventually will drain to the community garden right next to that property. All of that is meant to be not only what we believe to be a healthy way to kind of move forward with the redesign of the structure, but we want to be an example of how Pam was saying here is to create a circular economy with students coming in to help using their brilliant minds to help create elements of building by reusing materials in a way that's also good for the planet, right? And so far we've accomplished a lot, but we need more people engaged, and we need a lot of help. And I can see some students out here that have already helped. It's been great. So I say all that to say we're positive. We're quite positive and looking forward to it. We think we can do it. So as scary as development might be, we've been doing it, and there's a way to kind of move forward consciously.
Great, thanks. All right.
I saw Rob struggling with the whole thing. I'm Adam Emmerich. I'm the city administrator for the city of Conway. And the most serious problem that we face, at least at the government level, related to growth, is infrastructure and being able to keep up with the growth that we're having from that aspect. And infrastructure as a challenge should not be an excuse not to grow. Part of the reason for that is growth is happening whether we want it to or not. You cannot just turn the faucet off. The faucet doesn't fire hose, and it's coming. I think Rob mentioned the population doubling from 2020 to 2020 is going to double again probably in this decade we're in now. So to have a population that wants to move here in those numbers, we need to be able to address what's going to take for those people to have all the things that they need. Anyone who travels on 501 and complains about it, that's a symptom of infrastructure and growth not meeting what it needs to be. But if you went in a time machine back 10 years, you'd still be complaining about traffic on 501 because we haven't built another road to be parallel to 501, and we haven't built another bridge over the Waccamaw River, and it will take probably 20 to 25 years to build another bridge over the Waccamaw River and about $1 billion. And that isn't something that anyone at the local level can do. As a city, our annual budget has grown astronomically in the last few years. It is still less than $80 million, so $1 billion bridge is never going to happen, ever, in Conway, unless we have a tool to do that. And I'm not going to get into any of the things that are out there to make that work because it's not important. Roads is just a piece, though, of the infrastructure puzzle. You may have been following, we've got power generation issues. Some of that is stemmed by environmental concerns over the current way that the power is generated. Water supply is a problem, not just from the forever chemicals that have been found in the Waccamaw River, but also just in the terms of the pipes in the ground not being large enough to get the supply needed to the development that's coming. In order to get enough flow for fire hydrants to work, you have to be able to have enough pressure on those lines. And the more houses that draw from that pressure, the less pressure there is, the less likely it is that fire hydrants are going to work when we need them. To fix that, we need to build a water tower. And a water tower costs now $8 million. $8 million. And again, our budget is $80 million. That's everything that we do. So it is not within the realm of possibility for us to build all the water towers that are probably needed right now in Conway in 1 year, but that's what we have to face as a function of the infrastructure needed to be able to keep up with the demand. Sewer lines are the same thing. The capacity of the sewer lines has to be able to make sure that we can get all the sewer that is generated to the sewer treatment plants. And our pipes are tied into Grand Stream Water and Sewer pipes, which tie the entire county together. So if you stand at the intersection of Mill Pond Road and 501, we have a sewer treatment plant there. It takes all of Aner's sewage, all of Loris's sewage, and half of Horry County is through one pipe. And that pipe is not sized enough to be able to handle that amount of sewage. To replace that, we actually just added another line parallel to that to handle some of that flow. It costs $12 million. Everything is now in terms of millions of dollars for infrastructure, and we're sometimes billions of dollars. And then that leads to public safety. There is always a demand for more firemen, more policemen, more everything in public safety, and we are competing amongst ourselves. The city of Conway just raised salaries on our police force by $17,000 a year for policemen. That was to keep up with Horry County and Myrtle Beach, because every time we trained the policemen, as soon as they got their 2 or 3 years with us, they would go to one of the other competing agencies because they paid more. So we were the farm team for the county, and we can't afford to be the farm team, losing all of the folks that we've trained to be our policemen to the larger agencies. A $17,000 per employee raise is, again, millions of dollars for the city of Conway each year. And so that has an effect on us as well. And then it was touched on, I think, as housing shortage being an issue. Housing shortage is actually an infrastructure issue. The reason your housing costs have gone up is because during 2010, 2008, 2008, 2009, 2010, we stopped building. And so we have a shortage of houses in this community, not just here in Conway, but nationwide. We have a shortage of housing, which is why we're tearing down all the trees to build more houses at a record pace, because when we build them, they sell. Because everyone wants to move here because of our climate, which is the double-edged sword. Because all the people that are moving here, a large portion of them are of a retiree population, which means they're not entering the workforce. So we have no one coming in to be able to fuel the workforce that is needed for the retiree population that's coming. So that is another issue that we have. We don't have enough workforce to be able to handle the growth that we're having. And then that feeds into the schools. The schools are the same problem we have. It's a $1 billion issue. I think it's $250 million to build a new school. And because of the growth we're having, every year they're building 3 schools in our district. So that's the biggest challenge we're facing, is not just infrastructure being the reason to stop growth, because that can't happen. It's keeping up with the growth that is coming with our infrastructure. And thank you for nodding all the time. That's really reassuring.
Great, thank you. I feel like I'm learning so much. So I have now a set of questions that I'm going to direct to each panelist that kind of hones in on their area of expertise. And Rob, again, I'll just start with you because you're closest to me. So what are the demographics and what economic data do we have on our growth? What kind of people are moving here? Are they working? What's their race, their age, and what kind of homes are we building? Are we building multifamily? Are we building single family? And what are some of these just demographics so we can understand what's happening?
Good question. So our demographics are overwhelmingly older. We're an older demographic. The people moving here are overwhelmingly older. The types of homes they're building has changed in the last 20 years. We used to build single family, unless it was condos on the beach, and that goes all the way back to 1980, before the S&L crisis, which was condominium development with tax shelter. Now we build multifamily apartment complexes. We build a lot of them. We build single-family homes for rent. Entire neighborhoods are for rent. The entire nation there's been a shift from an ownership mentality to more of a rent mentality. Some of that is because of affordability issues. We have affordability issues here. We are one of the poorest counties in the state in terms of the major metropolitan areas. We're in one of the poorest regions of the state. The NISA region, which is it goes all the way up to Florence, if we include Marlborough County, Williamsburg County, Georgetown County. Horry County is the one county out of that, I think it's 8-county region, that actually has had positive growth in population consistently over the last 20 years. That makes it a challenge in terms of, when I say benchmark, if you try to compete with your neighbor, right? If your neighbor is a very poor region that is not challenged with the growth that we are, there's not a lot to learn from that neighbor, right? So our neighbors that are similar to us are not near us. They're actually Charleston, Somerville. And I would point to Somerville before I would point to Charleston, because Charleston is a different animal altogether, right? And its challenges in terms of flooding are significant, right? And so that's a whole different animal. Greenville, right? Greenville has reinvented itself since the 1980s. It was an old textile town. The textile mills went out. There was major pollution in the river there. Now it's a beautiful area. They've done a great job. It's a poster child for economic redevelopment done the right way across the United States and probably across the world. Way off track.
Yeah, no, that's good, you're right on track.
So more of our demographics, I mean, we're of course, when you're in the South, I would say our white population plus our black population is higher than where people are coming from in the Northeast, right? That would be, I mean, I come from a state where it's 97% white, right? We're not white effect here, right? Hispanic population is also strong here. So we have growth in, more diversified population-wise, but our labor force growth, we're challenged. We don't have corporate involvement here. I think as soon as I say that out loud, I came here right when ABS left this area and went to Greenville-Spartanburg area. When I think of partnerships, Greenville, I mean, big companies sponsoring amphitheaters, bike paths, all kinds of things, school programs. We don't have that kind of corporate existence, right? So that's a challenge. That's a long-term challenge, right? Because I mean, the fact is, we're an hour and a half from the interstate, and that is a challenge in terms of accessibility to things that big corporations want, right? So, does that answer?
Yes, that's perfect. In fact, and so now I'm going to have Pam follow up on that, because I feel like some of the things you mentioned also had to do with the nature of our geographical region that constrain a lot of the things that we can do, which explains why we don't have just a grid everywhere, because there's rivers everywhere. So can you describe some of our most pressing environmental issues, and maybe you mentioned to me some resilience plans and things like that maybe there's a 2040 plan, like what planning is being done? And is the planning just local, or are we trying to cooperate with each other?
Thanks. So, first of all, there's been since 2015 a global movement called the Sustainable Development Goals and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is actually part of our state resilience plan. And so, the term sustainable development was only coined in 1987, and the Sustainable Development Goals were only founded and passed in 2015. So while we're only 17% there to get to 2030, I mean, a lot of this is relatively new. All of us on this stage were born well before any of these terms and these processes took place. And so we are, as a planet, developing how we're going to handle them. And the science developed at the same time. It was only in 1985 that the World Meteorological Organization determined that maybe we had some warming going on. And so we're picking up the pace on our knowledge track. But in terms of resilience planning, we've come a long way. And I would say that there's where it's really hopeful, because North and South Carolina are sort of leading the way after our flood commission was commissioned, and actually Tom Mulligan, the flood water commissioner, is a professor here at Coastal. What we did is, after the storms of 2015 to 2020, I mean 5 years in a row, which many people who have since moved here during COVID did not experience, we took a good look at the state and were devastated and realized if we don't change something, we're going to have a lot of problems. And so we actually created a whole new, speaking of changing government, we created an entire office that funnels now federal funds through the disaster recovery to counties and to municipalities. Horry County has been a big recipient of those funds to mitigate flooding. So that's a really great positive. As I said, resilience and flooding is one factor of sustainability. Adam mentioned energy, we've all mentioned housing, we've mentioned economic development, we've mentioned education. Those are all issues. So in terms of planning, we have a state plan for resilience, and that resilience plan has been mandated now to counties. Now there are 10 elements that are required, one of them being resilience. That's a real positive. We're working on it. I would like to see us model some more stringent guidelines for resilience planning, not in a way that is constraining, but in a way that provides data and metrics. And the state has done a great job by purchasing First Street's data and providing it to municipalities and counties, which is a more accurate flood data than FEMA. FEMA is past. it's not predictive. And so if you buy a house and you look at FEMA data, you're looking at what happened in the past. It's not predictive, including climate models for the future. So the First Streets data, for example, was 20 to 30% more predictive of the flooding in the upstate than FEMA, just to kind of give you an example of why we need to really seriously. So first we have to ground, our planning needs to be grounded in science and data. We have fantastic scientists here at Coastal that can help our local governments and want to help our local governments do that, number one. And that's sort of outlined in all of the best practices. Another really good example is the Aloha 2040 plan, Hawaii. Say what you will about Hawaii, but they took a statewide approach in every county, and you can see dashboards of how they're measuring things. So that's one thing. Now the Office of Energy in South Carolina is looking at, here at Coastal, we're part of the Solar for All initiative. We're looking at how energy can make us more resilient, not just because we want to lower carbon emissions, but we need to be redundant. We have to have a redundant grid for failure purposes. So that's a whole other issue. And Adam mentioned, issues around, we've heard issues in the news around solar farms, et cetera. But the real issue is, if Santee Cooper is your utility, and we don't have the solar plants that they had originally planned for, and we have growth, we have a need for energy. If we want to have economic development, we have a need for energy. And by the way, it's mandated by the legislature that every single person has a right to as much energy as they want at any time. That's for equity, so that we can't turn off the lights on one neighborhood over another. So I just want to point out, I know I'm running out of time, but in my mind, I'm concerned about insurance. Insurance is a big factor that is an indicator. Insurance companies are well aware of these risks, and we know that in 2024, our insurance went up anywhere from 11 to 20%. We know that our home insurance is next year, they're looking at somewhere around a 20% increase on insurance. You're hearing an underlying sort of conversation among people, not just on housing affordability, but can they afford insurance? And we just finished, the Rise Center just finished a study with the Office of Insurance and the Department of Insurance and the Office of Resilience on this issue that includes health. And community, we have, as Rob mentioned, we have a large portion of our community that's vulnerable. If you look at the state maps and you overlay social with environmental vulnerability, Horry and Georgetown counties are highly vulnerable to risk. And our insurance rates are some of the highest. You saw Myrtle Beach is the highest in the state, and only predicted to be higher. And about 71% of homes in the United States are under or uninsured. When you couple that with heirs property, with many of our communities here in the Low Country, we're looking at communities that won't be covered. Jelena, I didn't get to environmental aspects, but I'll just end with PFAS. The Black River is one of the most highly polluted of PFAS in our state, and that runs out into the Winyah Bay. And yet at the same time, we have some of the largest biodiversity in our state. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Yeah, very good. Jamie, when we were talking, we also talked about heirs property, which you don't have to talk about that. But now that we're merging into social issues, why don't you describe what are some of the most pressing social needs of like the original community members, of people who just grew up here and now all of a sudden this is taking place around them? Like, what are their needs and what are the problems that they're suffering with in the last 2 decades of rapid development?
Yes, thank you. This is such a great question, and also so many layers to this question, including how do we think about the original inhabitants, right? Because of course the original inhabitants, the Waccamaw people and the Winyah people, the Waccamaw Indian people are having a powwow, by the way, on November 2nd and 3rd, so you can go out and support the Waccamaw people that are still here in our community. I encourage you to do that. There's also folks at Coastal who are doing great work with the Waccamaw Indian people, so you can Google that and their work will come up. So, let's get real original here. And when we talk about needs too, as humans, we all share the same needs, right? I mean, we need food and water and shelter and support and community, even as introverts do need people sometimes. So these are like very human basic needs that we share with some groups of people who have different abilities to meet those needs, and that happens for many different reasons. And my work has really taken me, to some degree in the Rosewood neighborhood in Sophistee, and to a large degree, I've been deeply embedded in the Bucksport community, which is on the outskirts of Horry County. If you're not familiar, which many people are on the outskirts of Horry County, almost to the border of Georgetown County. And I draw a distinction between, these two communities for a number of reasons. When we think about things like, what is the impact of development in different communities? So there's the impact of the people coming in, and they get their houses and their subdivisions. Well, those subdivisions were built in a place where potentially people lived before. And some of those people wanted to sell up. They wanted to sell their land. And I've been to a number of county council meetings where they're tussling over zoning. A little bit later, they're tussling over zoning and they're tussling over who can sell what. And for many of, air quotes for the original, but for some people who have been in the county for generations and have been holding land, that land is their retirement income. And now they're older, they want to sell that land, and go on and do what they need to do, as they age. Sometimes that's the way it's working, but a lot of times things are built in places where people have existed. In Bucksport, it is what we call an African American settlement community, and that means that it is a community that was built by formerly enslaved people after the Civil War. And when those people, built their community there, it was in land that was not considered very valuable, but they were able to make a living and build a community. Many people in Bucksport trace their ancestry back 5, some people 8 generations. They are deeply connected to the culture and the history of that land. Now, if you were to drive through Bucksport, and I know that this is not going to sound great, I don't mean it as a judgment, but from, external, outsider eyes, looking from an economic perspective, it might not look like much. Many people live in mobile homes. Many people live in older homes. Many people live in homes that might need repairs from the frequent flooding that they did not used to have. So this is a community where people are deeply invested in where they're living, and it is a community that is at the confluence of the Waccamaw and Great Katy rivers, so it did occasionally flood. It did not always flood, how it has been flooding now. And that is in part related to, again, development up the watershed that, it now comes down more quickly than runoff flows through the river. It is also related to expansion of right-stream water and sewer treatment facilities. So we bought up, thousands of acres adjacent to the Bucksport community that they had been using for logging. In 2015, I think, they cut down the trees and built a water treatment facility there. Well, now that those trees are gone, the ecosystem services performed by those trees no longer exist either. So after the loss of those trees, the Bucksport community now has had 7 major flooding incidents since 2015. And it's a low-income community. Many people don't have insurance. Even if you have insurance, insurance does not cover penny for penny. Even if you get aid from FEMA, which not everyone is eligible for, FEMA does not cover penny for penny. So there are people in Bucksport who still need roofs repaired. Maybe they were able to repair the roof, but the floors are still warped. So when we think about original inhabitants, again, there's a number of ways to think about that, from the African American settlement communities to the original inhabitants to the elderly folks who want to sell their property, and all of these kind of come together. But again, my work has really led me to focus in Bucksport. So there's also new roads proposed that will come. Well, there are 16 different paths potentially for the new road. 10 of them come through Bucksport, which is a community of about 700 or 800 people. So one of those roads is very likely going to come right through Bucksport. And again, from an outsider perspective, it might not look like much. There are homes that can easily be torn down, that can be flipped, potentially. From a purely economic perspective, there's a rational decision-making pattern there. But from an ethical perspective, or from a community perspective, or from a historical perspective, it raises all kinds of questions about who gets to stay and who is forced to leave to make way for newcomers. So that's where my research has taken me, and that's where I've been really embedded in the last several years and formulated my response.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so I'll turn to Alan really quickly. So what are some of the ways that we can develop sustainably with an eye to the historic heritage that Jamie was just talking about in terms of our coastal region?
Yeah, and I'd like to, Jamie, thank you for that rich explanation of Bucksport. And you might as well have been speaking to a certain portion of downtown Conway, just west of kind of Church Street. As it is, many of the newer homes developments have taken the place of the older structure, the older historic structures, all of which have materials in them that either could have been saved or could have been reused in many different ways. The one thing I should note is our work, we do not want to take down homes on the Horry County Historic Preservation Commission as well. And I would always fight to keep historic structures up. But again, when they have to come down, what we don't want to see is, one, the materials lost to the landfill forever, but the history and the connection that so many of these people have to the land in that area, because that is what's currently happening. And it's related to the environmental issues, because I've documented at least 7 homes in the past 2 years that have been in this area of Conway that have been demolished and sent to the landfill, many of which also have asbestos. So they're being demolished without the asbestos being abated first, right? It's all at once, boom, and it flies in the air everywhere, let alone into the ground. But those 7 homes, just that I know about, right, amount to about 700 tons. Or I'm sorry, I'm doing the numbers wrong. 7 tons. Each home's about 100 tons. So 700 tons. Am I doing that right? Right. Could very well could be more or less, but around 700 tons. And the materials in these historic structures came from trees that grew in the area that had sequestered carbon for hundreds and hundreds of years. Many of these trees probably started growing in Horry County, if not Conway itself, sometimes around 1700s, right? They were probably milled in the early to mid, it's not quite clear always when they're milled, maybe early 1800s, mid 1800s, finally put in some of the structures, late 1800s, early 1900s, and now they're ending up in the landfill, right? That means once they're in the landfill, they start decomposing and letting off all of that sequestered carbon, right? So this is why campaign for historic trade has now been kicked off by the Labor Department. And I should note too, this is why the folks that trained us in deconstruction, our first full home deconstruction last year in December, Repurpose Savannah, their director, May Boley, has now moved over to the Labor Department. She's moved over to the Labor Department to spearhead the curriculum for deconstruction because it's necessary, because of all the carbon that's being lost and sequestered. This curriculum will be developed by her and her staff, in which we can train future workers in the practice of deconstruction and material salvage, let alone construction. Because one of the best ways to learn how to build sustainably is by taking things apart. And that's one thing you definitely learn when you're doing archaeology. And so, all the while, we can do this in a way where we're preserving the histories and materials. And our model is to provide these materials to those that need it the most on a sliding scale. So we can offer these materials for free, essentially, for those who can shore up their homes still, right? Hopefully, we'd like to see this all happen in-house, but we're providing also trained construction workers who can help with these homes, right? With our materials to shore them up so they don't have to come down in the first place. But if they do, we can at least retain materials so that they're not sent to the landfill along with the histories.
Thank you, Alan, that was great. Okay, Adam, you're gonna be last and probably the most biggest bomb. Why is rezoning, this is our major issue, like in Horry County is rezoning and people get real mad about it. And I know that there's a big process. And I know that there's many different developments. I live in Carolina Forest and I've watched like 12 different developments go up ever since I've lived there, which is not that long. So can you share with us like some of the things that are going on with respect to the subdivisions and flood mitigation and like how does the city of Conway differ from Horry County?
Sure, well, first, if I can correct you nicely,
Please correct.
Coastal Carolina University is in the city of Conway.
We are.
And we are super proud to be in home Conway.
Okay, there we go. We are in the city of Conway.
That's right. Right now you're in the city of Halloween, but normally city.
That's right. I forgot. City of Halloween.
The rezoning process shouldn't be controversial because there are a number of review processes that are peer-led. And let me even step back. It's not the rezoning process that is the controversy. It's development in general that is the controversy. This is fine. Okay, there it is. You can have a piece of property that has zoning already on it. All properties in Horry County, especially all properties in the county, have a zoning designation on them already. So there is by right something you can do with your property that is defined by that zoning class. It could be residentially zoned, it could be commercially zoned, it could be industrially zoned, but you have an ability to do something with your property as you sit right now. The rezoning process is, I want to do something different with my property than I already have the right to do. Sometimes that is, I have a piece of commercial property and I want to build houses on it. Sometimes I have a piece of residential property and I want to build a store or a gas station or something like that. Those are the easy ones to be able to just say. A lot of what we have here now is a piece of property that may one day have been a farm or a large property that was farmed. It has a designation, sometimes it's at the county level, and now they want to build houses on it. So they want to not just rezone, but also annex from the county into the city. And there is a process for that, and that process involves our planning commission, which has to review the project, has a public hearing on the project. Our planning commission is made up by volunteers that live in the city. They're not elected officials, they're not staff members, they're people who actually live in Conway. And their job is very simple. It's to look at that request. Is it good for the city? Is it consistent with what's around it? Will it cause any harm that can be negated? And then they make a recommendation to our city council. And our city council then has to do the same sort of evaluation, but they're the ultimate authority, and then they make that decision. None of that process is done quickly. None of it is done behind closed doors. None of it is done nefariously. I think there's a lot of times an opinion that is the case because most people don't see what goes on in that process. We have a large annexation that came in. It was a 1,700 acre annexation. That is very, very big. It will be about 3,000 home units. That is a mix of multifamily and single family and a little bit of commercial. It's a huge development. It took 3 years for it to go from the first time they came to talk to us to when it actually got to city council to be approved. That is, all of the 3 years, nobody in the public saw it, not because we were hiding it, but because it wasn't ready yet. It wasn't a good development. It was bad. It didn't meet our requirements. It would not have been something that we ever would have taken in. So we work with the developer, work with the proposer. How can you make this something that should be annexed in? Not how can we set you up for failure, but how do we make this something that Conway can be proud of, whether it comes in or not when it gets to the final approval. It's something we can handle and something that will not cause flooding, that will not unnecessarily tear down homes, that will minimize the impact to the environment by using sustainable development techniques like our conservation subdivision ordinance. And all of that still ends up with controversy because people just don't want development. And it's not a lack of understanding that has that response. It's a intentional disinterest in the facts. There it is. It's an intentional disinterest in the facts. People don't want to be educated. They want to say no. They want to be the last person that moved here, and that's it. And that is not something that can happen. And we see it every day. There's a phrase called NIMBYism. It's not in my backyard. It used to be something that was, I don't want that industrial plant next door to me. Even though we know there has to be an industrial plant, we just don't want it here. And that was NIMBYism. NIMBYism is now, I don't want anything beside me. They can have the right to build 20 houses there now. I don't want those 20 houses. I will come up with a million reasons why they shouldn't do it, and I will come to every city council meeting wearing the same color t-shirt as my neighbors, and I will fight it, and I will vow to not elect the person who's going to make the decision. I will throw all my weight behind this. I'm going to accuse everybody of all these things that aren't true, and that's just not good for the system we're in. It politicizes everything. It makes everybody at each other's throats when we need these things. We need housing. We need quality things. And that really is the problem. That really is the controversy. It's just folks don't want anything. And that's a newer development on the old NIMBYism. And I think there's an acronym for it. It's like bananas, but I can't think of what it is. Yeah, something like that.
Build absolutely nothing anywhere.
That's it. There you go.
Okay. See, I hadn't heard that one. I didn't know about bananas.
One thing you did touch on is, or I touched on and you mentioned is our conservation subdivision ordinance. We have an ordinance that is an allowed by right use of your property. So if you have a property that is zoned residentially, you can elect to use our conservation subdivision standards. This was put in place in 2011, but it was not used until just the last 2 years, I believe. What it says is that if you've got a piece of property that has sensitive areas, it might be have wetlands through it or just low-lying swampland, you can buffer those wetlands. You put a buffer around the perimeter of your development, and you build in a clustering format. So you don't utilize every piece of your land. You utilize smaller footprints of it. It requires less roads. It requires less water and sewer infrastructure. You get a smaller lot size for that. You get different developmental standards, but it protects more of the property that you're building on. So we've utilized that. Now I think 4 or 5 different larger subdivisions have utilized that. It's much better for the environment. It's much better for the community because they're sort of now a test subject for the proper design standard. It elevates the property values in those communities, and it saves the developer money on the front end because they don't have to build as many miles of roads, as many miles of water pipes, of sewer pipe, and all those things because they get a smaller lot size for doing that. Part of the reason we were successful in doing that was not a will on the part of the development community. We had the ordinance in place for a number of years. No one was utilizing it, and we were getting more and more flooding as a result of whatever the changing climate could be attributed to. And again, politics, I won't get into it. But we weren't getting anyone to do it because builders are a creature of habit. They want to come in, clear cut, bring in fill dirt, level the land, and have a clean slate. It's just easier. And that wasn't what we wanted. And so we required anyone developing a property of over 50 acres to design it the normal way and design it in conservation subdivision. So they had 2 plans to look at, and they could realize that, I can get the same number of lots, and it'll save me 20 to 30% of my building construction costs. And I can say this is a conservation subdivision and raise the price 5 or 10% on the homes. And all of a sudden the light bulb went off and people started utilizing it. And it's we haven't really had the great test on those projects yet because it takes 3 to 5 years to go from raw dirt to houses. So we're getting close to that in some areas. But I think what we're going to see is sort of a major change in the way we've done things that we could have been doing for a long time and we haven't been. You mentioned the flooding. Obviously, Common was devastated by flooding in 2015, 2016, and 2018. We started a buyout project in 2016 that did not get funded until 2018, did not get completed until 2021. We bought 42 homes that were the most susceptible to flooding. And in just the last few years, we've seen floods that would have damaged those homes if they'd still been there. So that is a proof positive that a buyout program can work if it's done the right way. And ours was 100% voluntary. One of the things that we did have an advantage on over a community like Bucksport is ours was mostly a upper middle class neighborhood that flooded. Our lower income areas do not have a flooding problem, which is a great not problem to have. But it also limits the amount of funding that you're able to get for programs like that because a lot of HUD funding and things like that don't want to be put into an upper middle class neighborhood. They're geared for communities like Bucksport. And you can't do flood mitigation in neighborhoods that don't flood, because that's just silly. And I think that's a good ending for mine.
That is a good ending. So this was fantastic. I'd like to take about 10 minutes. If you have time to stay, I'd like to have just 10 minutes of questions. And because we're short on time, I'll just have to ask you to like throw your hand up in the air. And another thing is I want you to be very specific. So have a specific question. Don't, this is not an opportunity to have a platform where you just like rail against, something. I would like a very specific question. So, okay, I see two people in the front row. Okay, Melissa, you go first.
So you guys talked about a little bit earlier with that there's like an issue with commitment in like this. What do you think it'll take to get like that problem solved, and how could students be a part of that?
Commitment in what way?
Like just the you mentioned it briefly, but just from your guys' like solutions that you brought up, it seems that there's
Kind of a buy-in by creating connections.
Yeah.
Is that kind of,
Yeah.
in terms of, I think if you build it, they'll come. That's what I found out. It's pretty good. And that's what we're doing, at least on our part, we're trying to, right? We believe now we're at a stage where we have to show people that this can be done in terms of material use. I will note that the city, as this is a plug, but it's also for the right reason. But the city has helped us. Recently, we have a big event coming up this Saturday, October 26th, called Common Artisan Festival. The city's happily supporting us a bit and helping us put this on, and with the idea of being kind of spread the message and to highlight the local crafts and folks that we believe can sustainability and also create what we call healthier practices between people, place, and planet. And so we're moving that direction. So I think it's exhausting though. But I think it's important. One thing I've learned is we're going to be exhausted for a little bit. Y'all are.
I'd just like to add that for the students, Sustain Coastal is a fantastic resource here on campus. And since we all just learned that we're all connected to Conway, and in fact, all of our trash flows into the Waccamaw River, and we happen to be funding a study on that with Dr. Chilhanna. I would encourage you to come to our waste-free football games and volunteer, come to the farmers markets, get involved. You can gain real skills here. Our campus is like the size of a city. So you can gain real skills. The campus salvage days, and create your own programs. We're going to have a grant opportunity that comes up here soon through Sustain Coastal. Thank you, Aramark, for sponsoring it. And students can apply for that. So maybe you have an idea of the future. We would like to, and you can partner with the community to do that. So if you want to be committed, that's a way.
I would just add, when it comes to commitment, I think it's really important to combine hope with urgency. I think young people are really carrying a lot of the urgency. And there's a whole discourse around eco-anxiety. So we need a little bit more injection of the hope. But I always tell my students, I don't know that any are here, they're going to be tired of hearing this, but I always use the example of the Wright brothers airplane. You imagine your image of the Wright brothers airplane, it looks like it was held together with paper and toothpicks. The original flight was less than 2 minutes long. Humanity had dreamed of flight for hundreds of years. People had literally died trying to fly. Finally, we fly in this rickety little airplane. No disrespect to the Wright brothers. 65 years later, we're on the moon. From the toothpicks and the paper to the space shuttle, people are walking on the moon in 65 years. That, in historical terms, that's the blink of an eye. And it is because we had the motivation and the will and the hope and the urgency to do it. We can do things. We just need the vision to do them. So that's where I say commitment will come from.
All right, I've got a couple of other hands. Dan.
So from some prevalent issue that I'm hearing is that we have the education for young people. But my question, I'm a bartender and I speak for a lot of people from older generations, and I hear overwhelming distrust, overwhelming lack of who don't want anyone to build anywhere near them. How can we redirect redirect our education, not necessarily towards young people, we have a young people support. Mainly, how can we redirect this towards older generations?
Encourage your parents and grandparents not to use Nextdoor or Facebook. Social media is I think the single biggest contributor to the distrust that's in the community. I live in Conway. My kids grew up in Conway. My family lives in Conway. I want the best for Conway. And I think that the distrust forgets that. They forget that our city council or our mayor live in Conway and their kids are growing up in Conway. They forget that we're part of the community and that, we have feelings too. And that this, I'll never forget, we had a community meeting. It was on a grocery store coming on 501. Should have been the simplest thing of all. The neighborhood came out against it, and literally they said to our planning director, "How can you sleep at night?" And you can't laugh in public meetings. You want to sometimes, but you can't. And the hope, we're cynical in government, and I think that cynicism sometimes comes out as something to distrust. But we grow to hate the public, and that's not healthy either. So I think social media is part of that problem, and we can't stay off of it either. We read the comments and we get mad, and then we argue with each other, and it's no good. So I think social media is, honestly, y'all in your generation aren't on Facebook generally, you're not on Nextdoor, please don't get on that. Maybe what the social media choices you're using are healthier than what we're using, so maybe don't use social media. But the double-edged sword of that is that's the only way to get our message out. If we want you to come to an event or we want you to know about something, we have to use social media because no one's turning on their TV to watch our Access channel. And if you are, that's really weird.
I would like to just follow up real quick. Also, I know I'm read this. Go to council meetings.
Yes.
Right? Attend the parents' board meetings. Attend all these meetings. As Adam was noting, this is a transparent process if you're there. And in many cases, it's hard to go, but it's live. You can watch it live or watch it later. And if you see something that seems to be upsetting or something, these council members will listen to you. I've been there.
And the meetings are boring, but that's good because government should be boring.
Yeah, a lot of details.
All politics is local.
Yeah.
So we're all fixated on the presidential election now and go vote. I think you should vote. It's wonderful and amazing. But be engaged in local politics. Those are where things are being decided that will impact your day-to-day life.
Okay, I know we're running a little short on time. One quick question.
I have a question for almost every panelist, but like you said, quick question. This is my most quick question, and it's for the gentleman on the left, for the gentleman on the right. Feel free to jump in. On average, how wealthy are the older people moving down to South Carolina? Is it a state where people go to die, or by them having a lot of money, are they actually contributing a lot to society through this idea of consumerism, which I know is a very poignant problem within city council, is the fact that maybe a lot of wealthier people aren't contributing through consumerism as much as they should be because they have money instead of just sitting on their wealth.
Oh, right. So,
I really put you on the spot.
I don't want to speak towards consumerism, but I will say the people who move here generally have a higher education level and higher wealth level than the native inhabitants here. If you go to restaurants, which is what has thrived since COVID, you will see many older folks in restaurants spending a lot of money, a lot more money than I would tend to spend my family in restaurants. They're there pretty regularly. I think it's wonderful. I think they do contribute a lot in that way. I would say if you want to talk about differences in voting demographics, the biggest thing is, older people tend to be leaving the Northeast. That's the biggest part of our migration inflow, and very high property taxes. And this is a lot of people. I can give you an example. Sometimes I get my oil changed in Jiffy Lube. The person who was changing my oils from New Jersey was a dealer in Atlantic City, and we got into the biggest conversation, it was a pretty long time, about monetary policy. I was fascinated, to be quite honest with you. And he said my property tax bill back in New Jersey was $14,000 a year. I don't know how many of the young ones know what that is, but down here, a pretty expensive home, you might pay $3,000 before, if you bought before 2022. $14,000 is a lot of money in taxes, right? So there is no wonder that a lot of people move to areas that don't have that kind of tax bill. However, I have a real estate program we've got 3 programs in real estate. We look at housing values. One of the major determinants of housing values is quality of education. The property tax is generally in the United States the largest contributing tax to education. In this state, that's not quite true because of Act 388 in 2008. You can look that up. Something on the ballot in Georgetown County that's also similar to that. I think there's a misconception about people move here. The economic development is happening. When I said corporation involvement was not that strong here, I think our healthcare companies would say, we are pretty strong, right? And so there are a lot of people moving here at the younger demographic that are working in the industry of healthcare. And that's I call that a passive economic development and growth and quality type of thing. So I think it's good to see. And I wouldn't blame everything on older folks necessarily. I think it's folks, right? I mean, you talk about homeowners. Those are the people who are generally going to these meetings and saying, don't build anything else. And it's not just here, it's all over the United States. All over the United States, right? So go to one of those meetings. Bless you.
We see it, the same folks from the Northeast, they've lived in their house all their lives, the property's accelerating in value like everywhere else, and they're able to cash out their home for $700,000 or $800,000 in cash because they paid off their home. They come down here, they buy a house for $300,000, which gives them enough money to buy a nice camper and a boat on a postage stamp lot. Now you've got a lot with a house and no garage, a camper and a boat, and the neighbors hate that, so they all complain about each other. Sorry, that was not the question you asked. But they've had the ability to buy toys because they have, when they cashed out, they still have the retirement. They're not paying the $14,000 in insurance anymore. So their quality of life has gone up tremendously. That allows them to eat out and allows them to contribute. But because of the property tax laws, they get homestead exemptions, and that they're not paying as much in property taxes to the city necessarily to be able to afford the quality of life that they want. They want the services that they had in the north for $14,000 a year for a $3,000 house payment or a property tax payment. And so that creates a little bit of that animosity too, is why aren't you doing this? We did this back in New Jersey. And you paid for it in New Jersey. But we still do strive for that same issue.
So then the differential on the Waccamaw Neck is over $100,000 income per year as a household, as compared to $33,000 a year in Harrisburg County. Just to kind of put numbers to it.
Yeah, that's a lot.
156.
So just to put, you're asking, just to put a large portion of that is retiree. Waccamaw Neck is unique to that, but just that's in Hawley's Island kind of area, but it just puts kind of numbers to it.
$100,000 is a lot for somebody who's for that, for property. Okay, I feel like this has been fantastic. I've learned so much. I do feel like I want to emphasize there are volunteer opportunities with all the professors up here. They all have organizations, and if you have any volunteer or and internships. So if you are interested in this stuff, please reach out to these professors afterwards or go to a city council meeting or a Horry County council meeting and get involved. I think the thing I wanted you to walk away with is that we're a community, we have to work together, we have to live with each other, and the more that we reach out to each other and try to form connections and bonds and think about the things we have in common, more than the things that we disagree on, then we'll be able to make progress on these issues. So let's thank our panel. Thank you. And I think they'll be down here at the end to take some more questions if you guys want to come and talk to them. Thank you.